We've been in this series, All I Want, and we started hearing this song on our Spotify recommendations, Good Plans, and I could not get it out of my head. And so I reached out to the band. I said, can you guys please lead this Sunday? It's a perfect song to wrap up the series we've been in, Psalms 23, All I Want. And this week we're going to be in verses 4 through 6. But before we jump into the word, you guys know a little over a week ago there was an assassination attempt on one of our presidential candidates. And that day, I won't get into the whole event. What I want us all to try to remember is the picture of the Secret Service agents. When he was shot, the Secret Service agents surrounded him chest to his body. Every single one of them created a human shield. And in one of the viewpoints of that picture, there were actually 4 arms deep of just wrapping arm to arm. They were literally this way, connecting to each other's arms. They created a human shield. It so arrested me in my spirit, I could not get it out of my head because I started to think about what that is when the Lord is called upon and his angels come and surround his children to where they are impenetrable from any sort of weapon that the enemy would try to throw. So I don't want to go down a political sideways thing, but I want you to think about your Lord when he comes to protect you. There is nothing fatal that can happen to you. Now, I need to clarify fatal because there are things that can happen to us. There are. But no matter what the enemy tries to do to kill you before it is your designated time to meet your Savior, it's impossible because the Lord has a hedge around you. And I'm going to tell you a little story. The year was 1995. It was Christmas time. Eddie and I were 6 months away from getting married, and it was our first Christmas that we were experiencing with both sets of parents. And we left Liberty University, where we were both students at the time. Eddie was a grad assistant in his first year of seminary, and I was a sophomore in college. And we were headed up to Pigeon Forge to meet his parents. And we had the most awesome time. We actually saw all these little Chapel of Loves, and it took every bit of self-control to not go to one of those Chapel of Loves and get married right there on the spot, because we were so in love with each other. But we didn't, because he said, your mom will kill us. And so we stayed true to our word. We didn't get married, but we had a great time with his parents and his brothers and their significant others. And then we were going to drive the 8-hour trek back to Chesapeake to see my side of the family. And so we get on the road, and we're a few hours down the road, and all of a sudden we notice that the RPMs are going down on our car as we're accelerating. And we both were like, what is going on? The car is not going. It's slowing down on the highway. We got to pull off. So let's try to pull off where we can kind of see a gas station that's got a service station connected to it. And guys, this is before cell phones. So we couldn't just like call somebody on the road. There were maybe beepers if you were rich, but we were not. So we didn't have a beeper, and we didn't have a cell phone. Anybody who was born after cell phones were created, you probably have no idea what a beeper is, but we do. Some of us that are a little older in the faith and in years. So we're driving down the road. We find this service station. Our car conks out on the exit ramp. And, you know, these are back in the days when you wore the Adidas sandals with socks in the wintertime. I don't know if anybody remembers those days, but we thought we were real cool, you know. And so we have the Adidas sandals with the socks in the snow, pushing our car to the service station. It was a hot mess, and well, actually a cold mess. And we were very irritated at this point. We get to the service station, and the guy says, oh, I know what's wrong. You're actually driving with 2 of your spark plugs unplugged. And he's like, I'm just going to plug them in for you, no charge. You guys have a Merry Christmas. And we were like, man, that's so nice. Thank you so much. Just get on the road. We get on the road a couple more hours, and sure enough, our car breaks down again. Well, here it has already been 8 hours, and we're now in Lynchburg, which is where we both lived in separate apartments. But we were at his apartment, and we were at his apartment trying to get a rental car. And the problem was he was 24 years old, and if you're 24 years old and male, you know that you're double the price of a rental car. And Eddie was making an hourly wage as a grad assistant, and needless to say, he did not have the money to be paying for this rental car, but we had to get to my house. I mean, we had to experience Christmas with my family. So he paid the cost, and he said, you know what, the Lord is going to provide. We're just going to get back on the road. So we were starving at this point. It was dinner time. We should have been there already. We stop at a Burger King. We're sitting down. He's kind of flustered to the point he doesn't really want to have a conversation with me. And I said, you know, babe, maybe, just maybe, God's protecting us from something. He's like, I love you, but I really don't want to hear that right now, you know. And he's like, I just want to get on the road. I just want to get where we're going. And I said, I understand. So we get in the car, trying to put on some Christian music to create the vibe, you know. And we're driving down 460, and all of a sudden we see flashing lights. We're it's our backup. We see all this caution tape. We drive to where they have diverted all traffic on 460, and we see a car completely enveloped around a tree, about 6 feet up. And we look at each other, and we look at the tree, and we're looking at all the cars going around. We go, okay, let's turn around. Let's ask the cop, what time was this accident? And so we did. We turned around. I mean, it didn't matter what our ETA was at this point. You know, it's like we're in investigation mode at this point. And we asked the cop, what time was this accident? And he tells us, and sure enough, it was exactly the time that we should have been driving on 460 at that very point. And we just looked at each other, and we were arrested in our spirit. In fact, we could not talk to each other. We began praying, we began praising, we began weeping before the Lord, because we knew at that moment that there was nothing we could do to get to our destination. Listen. There was nothing we could do to get to our destination, because God was going to protect us with a hedge of protection over us. And there was nothing we could do to get there at the timing that we wanted to get there, because if we would have gotten there at the timing that we wanted to get there, it would have killed us. It was His timing. It was His plan. So we go, we celebrate Christmas. We have a great time. Somebody gives him a cash gift for Christmas. That's the exact amount that he needs to pay for that rental car. He goes back to Lynchburg to pick up his car, to turn in the rental car. And he says, you know what? I'm going to try to drive the car to Kingsport, his hometown, because he knows the car service people there. You know, he knows he's not going to get ripped off. So he starts driving. It's a 3.5-hour drive. He doesn't have to stop. The car does not break down. There's nothing wrong with the car. We drove it for 2.5 more years. There was nothing wrong with that car. I want us to read in Psalms 23, verses 4 through 6, because there's a theme in this book, in this chapter, that the Lord is all you want, and He's all you need. And I'm going to give us 3 promises that the Lord gives us in these last 3 verses of Psalms 23. So we're going to start in verse 4. Thank you, my friend. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The first promise that the Lord gives us is His sustaining presence. Look at that verse 4. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. I don't know if you know this, but David was writing this psalm towards the end of his life. So he's looking back, almost like a biography. He's looking back at his life through the different seasons of his life, and he's seeing where the goodness of the Lord has been. He's seen what the Lord has been in his life. As Pastor Eddie reminded us, he's reminding himself that he's the sheep. The Lord is his shepherd, right? You guys remember that? It's been a couple weeks, but I'm just going to bring it back to you. We're the sheep. He's the shepherd. I was listening this past week to a leadership podcast that our overseer, Pastor Daniel Floyd, gives, and one of his guests said, it's so important to talk to yourself more than you listen to yourself. It's so important to talk to yourself more than you listen to yourself. David understood this. He'd been going through some of the greatest hardships and mishaps that are humanly possible. Think about this. His first wife hates him. She goes off and marries somebody else while he's hiding from her father who's trying to kill him. He's living in caves. He ends up with these people that want to follow him that are like the mishaps, like they're the rejects, right? They're the rejects from the kingdom, and they're the ones who end up becoming his army. Then they go and fight with him. He goes to Ziklag where they're hiding out. Everything's stolen from them. Now they want to kill him, right? I mean, it's almost like leadership 101. Don't be a leader like David, right? But he was actually the anointed of God. He was actually the anointed of God. He was actually a man after God's own heart. But how could this be? He was a murderer. He was a cheat. He was a polygamist. He did so many things in the kingdom that he shouldn't have done. How could he have been a man after God's own heart? But he was. He was. And he knew his Lord. And he knew what the Lord had been for him. And he knew the Lord had never forsaken him. And it's just incredible. But he talked to himself. There were so many psalms that he had where it started in despair, and by the end of it, it became praise. He was honest with the Lord. He didn't hide his emotions. It was okay. There's a whole book in the Bible called Lamentations. Do you know what that means? It means to have sorrow. It means to complain. It means to be honest about what's going on inside of you. He was honest. The Psalms are so honest. It's one of my favorite books, partly because it's a lot of songs, and I'm a singer, and I love that. It's very poetic, but also because of the honesty in it, because we don't have to hide what we're going through from the Lord. But he's looking back now on his life, and he's saying, man, he has been so faithful. I was 40 years old a few years ago. And when I turned 40, my daughter went off to college. She graduated from high school a year early, a little overachiever. But it really was heartbreaking to me because I was not ready to let her go. I was not ready to be an empty nester, and it also just so happened that we were changing careers at that point. Eddie had been invited to be a denominational leader, and so we left this beloved church that we love so much in Staten Island, New York. I thought I was going to retire there. I thought that's where our tombstones were going to be, and they said, you know what you've done in your church, we need you to do this in our region, and we knew beyond a shadow of a doubt this is what we were supposed to do. It didn't make it easy, but we knew it was what we were supposed to do. So we went, and we were living in Pennsylvania. I knew nobody. I was used to living in a very multicultural setting. We had 30 nationalities in our church family. We went to this humongous church, and they were all white. And I didn't know what to do with myself. It was very, very uncomfortable. And I was super uncomfortable because I was not feeling like a mother anymore. It felt like, okay, that season is done. And of course, that's the lie of the enemy. They need you just as much when they're adults, but I didn't know that. And so I became angry. And Eddie, and at that same time, there were hormonal changes that were happening in that season of my life. And Eddie said to me one day, I don't even know what to do with you. Like, I don't know how to handle this. Like, I don't know how to love you the way that you need me to love you. And there were some days that were not pretty in the Cole household because I was so in despair. And I went down into a very, very deep depression. Now, I've never experienced that before in my life. I'm a worship leader. I have an intercessory gift. The Lord is very close to me in my prayer life. But at this point, I could not get myself out of it. In fact, I would go to church and I would weep, but I couldn't sing. I would sit there and they would sing and I would just weep because it was washing over me like a healing balm. But I just had nothing, I could not sing. I had been wounded. There were things in our church experience that had wounded my ego and my flesh, and it hurt so deeply because they were very dear friends of mine, and it had happened years ago, but I couldn't get over it. All of a sudden now I'm not vocationally in ministry, and it was killing me. It was killing me from the inside out, and I couldn't say it. I couldn't communicate it. I needed to be strong. I wanted to put on that mask and put on that face. I was afraid to admit the anger that was going on inside of me. Until one day I was listening to, I was still reading my Bible, I was still praying to God, but this day I was listening to some worship music, and it was Jen Johnson and Bethel Music, and she was singing The Joy of the Lord. And it's a prophetic worship song. It doesn't really have this melody per se. It's just the joy of the Lord is my strength. The joy of the Lord is my strength. And then she goes on in this free worship to say, it breaks depression. The joy of the Lord is my strength. It breaks depression. And I began to weep before the Lord and pray in the Spirit. And as I was weeping, I began to feel that heaviness drop. But it doesn't mean that I was great right afterwards. What I had to do is speak the truths of the Lord to myself every day. So that meant that I put affirmations all over the house. I put scriptures all over the house. I put it in my mirrors. I put it on our walls. I put it in our car. Madison comes home from college. She goes, oh my gosh, Mom, you're one of those people. Like, what in the world? There's words everywhere in the house. Like, what is happening? And I just said, baby, I need it. I need it in this season. And I started speaking the truths of the Lord over myself. And suddenly the heaviness just began to lift. There's a song that's one of my favorite songs, and it's called Encourage Yourself. It's by the Tri-City Choir Singers. Look it up. Great, great song. It's a song about when David had everything stolen from him. The wives were gone. The kids were stolen. They had looted their camp. And it says that they wanted to kill him, but David encouraged himself or strengthened himself, depending on the Bible that you're reading, in the Lord. And the Lord told him, you're going to get it all back. Michelle and I were talking this week about Brownsville Revival song, about going to the enemy's camp and taking back what he stole from me. It's under my feet. It's under my feet. He's under my feet. Satan is under my feet. You got to tell yourself sometimes. You're hurting, you're broken, you're frustrated, you're angry, you're bitter, you're swallowed up by it. You got to tell yourself the goodness of the Lord, the goodness of the Lord. And he promises that he'll be with you. He says, you are with me. I'm going to fear no evil. You're with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So I love British shows. It's just this thing I have. I grew up my summers in England with my dad and my stepmom. And there's something magical about seeing the countryside. And so anytime I see any kind of show with British geography, I'm like, yes. So I started getting hooked on this show called Home Away from Home. And Eddie's like, why are you watching this stupid show? But I love it so much. It's from BritBox on Prime if you want to look at it. Totally clean. It's hysterical. It's these two families that swap homes with each other on different sides of the UK. And then you kind of see their whole experience about it. It's really funny. Some of them love it. Some of them really don't. And it's beautiful. It's clean. It's entertaining. And one of the places was in Yorkshire. And I actually learned a lot in this episode. Yorkshire, I don't know if you knew this, has over 3 million sheep. Over 3 million sheep in Yorkshire. And this couple, like what they do is they give them a cultural experience in their neighborhood. So the people that they swapped homes with sent this couple to the Yorkshire sheep to learn how to be a shepherd. And so they're there and they're with all these sheep, and this shepherdess apparently won all these awards with her sheepdog. and which is like a thing out there. And she's showing them how to get the sheep into the pen. And so she says the different commands, and they're like, you kind of see them like going from this into this small little thing, and then they go into the pen. And so she's like, okay, you try it now. And so they try it, and of course they really can't do it right. But she's being really nice and sweet about it. But she shows them this staff, and she shows them that the shepherd's staff, in the old days they had a little hook, kind of like the bottom of an umbrella. And it was because some of them, the sheep are not the smartest animals. Some of the sheep, they try to go the right direction, but she kind of have to snatch the sheep to get the sheep in the right way in the pen, because they kind of like missed the door a little bit, So it's just trying to do it their way, and it's just kind of like, no, you got to come a little bit back to center. And then sometimes they'd wander off, and if they're kind of like being disobedient, that was another thing, to just kind of bring it back, come back into the fold with the other sheep. I thought it was so interesting. And then there's the sheepdog that's kind of like on the outer skirts of the group of sheep, and just making sure that they're following the shepherd's voice, and just kind of like bringing them all close together. I thought it was so neat. Just like in my season of depression, the Lord is our shepherd, and sometimes he has to take that shepherd's hook and take us back to center. And there were things in my life that, yes, were hurtful, but during that season, the Lord was bringing things to light in my heart and in my mind that were not right, that I had not released. I thought I had released it, but it was still gnawing at me. And actually, those people that I was hurt by, I started dreaming about running to them and wrapping my arms around them in a big hug. And I said, God, I don't know what this means. What am I supposed to do about it? They ended up reaching out to Eddie, and sure enough, that's exactly what happened. We literally saw each other, and we wrapped each other in each other's arms, because we both had this longing for healing. We both had this longing for reconciliation. Did it mean we were going to walk side by side together in ministry as partners again? No, but we were giving each other blessing in our life moving forward. We were not going to walk with that stronghold of bitterness on our shoulders or unforgiveness on our shoulders any longer. And that's his love of correction. So let's go on to verse 5a. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. So right before we were getting ready to leave Pennsylvania, we were getting ready to go into Minneapolis for this promotion that Eddie had gotten in the denomination, and we were going to move halfway across the country, and so we were just kind of finishing up our medical stuff that we needed to do. You have certain things that once you turn 40, it's just like all downhill. I mean, it's ridiculous, and you got all these like yearly things you got to do, right? And so this was one of those things that Eddie had to do, a yearly thing that he had to do. And he goes in for a routine procedure, and they say, well, we found a little tumor in there, so we just went ahead and cut it off, and you just got a little clip there, and it'll be fine, and we'll take the clip out in a few days. And we're like, okay, and so we go home, and it seems okay. He's like not really feeling great. He says there's a little bit of blood, but I'm like, okay, you're fine. Well, if anybody knows my husband, he's like the guy on Monty Python where he's like, oh, it's just a little flesh wound. It was a lot more than a little bit of blood. In fact, he had lost half of his body's blood. And by day 3, he called me into his office and he said, Jessica, I need you. And he could not get the word you out of his mouth. He collapsed in front of me. His glasses flew off of his face. He looked straight through me, and I thought my husband was dead. And I started crying out to him, please come back to me. Please come back to me. I'm standing over him. I'm calling the emergency room. And they say, is he okay? I said, he's cold as ice. He's wet. And he's not responding. And I'm calling out to him, please come back to me. Well, the 3rd, 4th, 5th time, I lost track. he said, I'm okay. And so he came to, and they came in, and they said, he's in shock. His organs are about to shut down. We need to take him to the hospital. So he went into the ambulance, and I was behind him, and I called my pop, who is my go-to, was my go-to whenever there was some sort of emergency or great need. And I said, Bart, pray like you've never prayed before. Well, this is kind of comedic because Pop was bad at hearing, even though he was a sound man for so many years. And so he goes, what did you say, Jessica? I can't understand you. And I said, Pop, pray like you've never prayed before. I said, I thought Eddie had died, but he's okay, but he's in the ambulance in front of me. He's lost a lot of blood. I don't know what's going on, but just please pray, please. And I was afraid to tell Mom because Mom she doesn't like medical things and doctor emergencies, so I was afraid it was going to give her a heart attack. But I said, just pray, pray, pray. So we get to the hospital, and the first night they said, we're going to put the IV in you, we're going to give you some blood. The second night, they give him another transfusion, and then they start asking us in the middle of the night for directives. And that got real scary. What does that mean? And they said, well, if anything happens, we need to know, who do we call on, who's going to be the person to make the decisions on whether or not you stay connected to machines or anything like that. And the most amazing thing happened during that time in the hospital. As we were going through transfusions, as we were going through doctors in and out, not knowing if Eddie was going to survive, we had this amazing supernatural peace that came over us, this incredible love that we felt in the room by the Lord. And we genuinely felt like he was giving us his food, giving us his sustenance, and the enemy just had to watch. It was almost like the Lord was taunting the enemy of death because it wasn't Eddie's time yet. In fact, there was a lot more left for him to do. And so we left the hospital after 3 days. It took him a really long time to learn how to walk up a flight of steps again, but by 3 months he was running his miles again, and long distance running and doing so great. But that's what I always think about when I think about that verse. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. I don't know what you're going through, but I know this. There is nothing that can happen to you that the Lord does not allow or see. And he will feed you even when the enemy is right there in your face. He will feed you. And all the enemy can do is watch. All the enemy can do is sit there and watch. The next part of that verse says, you anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over. Well, he talked a few weeks ago about the anointing oil that goes over the sheep, and it protects the sheep from the bugs, right, and those gross little things, those parasites that come in. But I started thinking about this sermon illustration that a friend of mine did years ago at a women's conference, and I'm going to be honest with you. I have tried this illustration no less than 5 times upstairs in the kitchen in the church, and about flooded this kitchen in the church trying to do this illustration. I could not do it. So I got to talk to her and find out how to do it. But she took this cup of water, and you have all these other cups of water around it, and they represent your kids, your friends, your family, your work, your responsibilities, yourself, your hobbies, whatever it is. Maybe it's your service to the church. All these different things is what those cups represent. And what she did is she took your cup that's been filled up. You just came out of church, man. You are feeling good. You are feeling like, yes, the joy of the Lord is my strength. Ba, 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 ba. Right? You're like, yes, I am ready to face this week. And you start pouring out of your cup into those other cups. And by Monday afternoon, your cup is empty. And she goes, but now they still need you Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday and Saturday and Sunday. And she says, so then you go to Sunday and you get filled up again, and then you do that same routine, and you're wondering why you are living on fumes. And she said, instead, you could take this humongous, she pulls out this beautiful pitcher of water. I mean, I had the whole thing planned. I'm so frustrated. But, it's all right. She's a science major. I am not. So she learned how to do, it was probably beakers. I don't know. But she had this pitcher of water that represents the living water, abiding in Christ. Not just getting your token, oh, I did my devotions, I'm good, but walking with Jesus, living in his presence, praying when you feel frustrated. Instead of going to the curse word or instead of going to the anger that would normally rise up, you go, Lord, help me hold this thought captive. By the power of your Holy Spirit, I'm an overcomer. All those kinds of things, right? And the living water begins to, she pours it into your cup, but it spills over into the other cups. It's amazing. And it's just a continual flow. It never runs out, but you're not like empty in the cup. It's continually full. You're overflowing, and that's the picture of he anoints my head with oil. My cup runs over. My cup runs over. There's such a difference. If we only knew what was available to us as believers, if we only knew and tapped into even the half of it, it's a life changer. It's totally a life changer. So he gives you his sustaining presence was point number 1. Point number 2 is his supernatural anointing. And point number 3 is his surety of goodness and mercy. Let's look at verse 6. The first part of verse 6, it says, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. It's a great little book that a friend of Eddie's and mine wrote. His name is Mac Peer, and he wrote this book called A Disruptive God. And it's a whole study through the Psalm 23. And he is also a Hebrew scholar, really bright man, and he had read the entire chapter in Hebrew. And this word, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me. He says, it's the Hebrew verb David used isn't just the passive sense of follow, it's the active sense of pursue. It's not just that goodness and mercy follows you, it's that goodness and mercy pursues you. Now, there's a difference. We were talking about Bible study Thursday night, and the difference between Bible reading and Bible study. This is one of those where it's like, this is where you get the gold in Bible study versus Bible reading. Because when you're actually studying what this word means, it has a whole other significance. That surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. No, surely goodness and mercy shall pursue me all the days of my life. It's coming hard after you. It's coming hard after you. And that is such a comfort. It's such a comfort when we're feeling so low and when we're feeling so distraught that his goodness and his mercy is pursuing you. It demonstrates initiative and intent. He pursues us with his goodness. So I'm going to give you 3 subpoints to his goodness and mercy. Because of his goodness and mercy being a sure thing, there's a confidence that is built after walking with Jesus for many years. You can look back and see the goodness of the Lord. He talks about it in his book. He says, one of the best ways we can see how God is leading us is to look back over our lives. When we plot out the major life lessons and experiences God has given us, almost as if we are writing our spiritual biography, we're better able to discover the clues he has placed in our lives and experiences, and then interpret why we are where God is leading us. Have you ever wondered why? Why, God? Why would you send me here? Why am I in this season? Why do we have to wait You know, I can't tell you how many times where we would get stir crazy in our early years in ministry. And I remember our pastor, he was our pastor, even though Eddie was a pastor, coming to do this revival. Back in the 90s, you did revivals for 3 days. I don't know, somehow we just felt like the Lord ended it on Wednesday. It was just a very bizarre thing, but it was like Sunday night, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday it's done. I don't know. God help us, but we did it. And he was preaching on Jonah. And I couldn't stand this series because we were Jonah, right? It felt like we were Jonah. And the whole point was we were supposed to stay where we were called at that time. We didn't want to stay. It was hard. People were mean. And we were frustrated. And we were young and hot-headed, and we thought we knew it all, you know? And so, come on, Lord, send us somewhere else. It's more comfortable. And he said, listen, if you don't pass this test now, he'll give it again. And you're going to keep on taking that same test until you pass it. Well, now I look back on all of that. And I'm so grateful for all those lessons. Because planting a church, I got to tell you, it ain't easy. It's hard. And we're not in our 20s or 30s. We're in our... But because we've been through those tests before, we know the goodness of the Lord. We know the faithfulness of the Lord. We know what it's like to build a foundation. We know what it's like to work through the hardships that happen in ministry. It's not new to us. So there's a conviction, not only there's a confidence that's built, but there's a conviction that he gives you for others. I'm going to just read this part that he talks about. He says, he is not content simply to have us on the right side of the spiritual ledger. He wants our lives to be washed in his goodness to the point that we become like him and pursue others for his name's sake with that same level of goodness. The perception of the church in much of the United States culture is that we are primarily concerned about isolating ourselves from unpleasant things. An equally strong perception is that we are more concerned about being right than being compassionate. The reason the imagery of the shepherd in Psalms 23 is so important is because shepherds pursue lost sheep. Shepherds leave 99 to find one. The paradox of the spiritual life is that we cannot spend all of our time living safely and comfortably in the sheep pen, indifferent to lost sheep, while expecting to experience the pursuing goodness of God. But we see the stunning depth of God's goodness when we watch the remarkable changes he wants to make in others to whom he has connected us. We've heard it said a few times from different people as they've journeyed into our ministry, I don't know where I fit. I'm uncomfortable. I don't know where I fit. And I would suggest this thought. Maybe God's called you to be a sheepdog. Maybe you feel like you don't fit because you're not called to be a sheep. You're called to partner with the shepherd in helping to keep the flock in line and into the pen, into safety. Maybe that's the reason why. I would just suggest to you that maybe the reason why you're uncomfortable just being a sheep is because God's called you to be a leader. And here's the deal. The sheepdog knows its purpose. The whole purpose of the sheepdog is to protect the sheep, to listen to the shepherd, and to make sure that you're in line and putting the sheep right where they're supposed to be. That's the whole purpose of a sheepdog. Whoa. That's hot off the press. I felt that so strongly in my spirit today that some of you are called to be sheepdogs. And C, there's a commitment to be his expression of goodness and mercy to others around you. We are never more like God than when we participate in risk-taking initiative. Here's how it wraps up. David wraps this whole psalm up with this, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. There's a contentment that rests in the spirit heart of the believer to just be in his presence. Mac Pierce says the Hebrew verb dwell means to abide, to be with someone. The word conveys living in an unhurried state, hanging out, just being in his presence. Thursday night, we had Bible study together, and I was sitting at the table. We were having our table talk, and Mackenzie and Autumn, we were finished, and they said, "Wait a minute, Pastor Jess, you didn't answer the question." And I said, "Oh, okay." And they said, "Well, what is it about the Lord? What is it about his word that makes you so hungry for it?" And I said, "Well, I got to be honest. The Lord arrested me as a teenager. He arrested my spirit. I mean, I was saved. But he did something. He captivated my heart. I fell in love with him. And I love my husband. But he doesn't satisfy every void in my heart. The Lord does. The Lord supplies every void in my heart. He supplies what is a vacuum hole inside of me. In fact, Augustine said it like this: he fills the God-shaped vacuum in our hearts that only he can fill. And I know this because I tried to fill it with sex. I tried to fill it with alcohol. I tried to fill it with stuff that I shouldn't be watching. I tried to fill it with being in the cool crowd. I tried to fill it with other things, and it all left me feeling empty. It all left me feeling ashamed because I was sitting in a bed of lies. It left me feeling broken. It left me feeling exposed. And then the Lord came and he covered me. He enveloped me. He covered me with his love. His banner over you, church, is love. What he did for me, he can do for you. John 10 says this: I am the good shepherd, and I know my sheep, and I am known by my own. I have felt his rod of correction, church. He steered me back in the sheep pen when I wanted to go astray. He's given me the promise of his protection and his presence. Jesus goes on later in John 10 in verses 27 through 30, is he's talking to those who still refuse to believe in him. He says, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me, and I give them eternal life. They shall never perish, neither shall anyone snatch them out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of my Father's hand. I and my Father are one. So now I'm going to bring it to you. There's some of you that God's calling you to partner with him. He's the great shepherd, but he's calling you to say, okay, I'll be the sheepdog. Forget the connotation. Look at the picture. I'm going to be in partnership with you. I'm going to help you, Lord. I'm going to help you in partnership. I'm going to help come alongside and care for your sheep. I know my purpose. It's not about me. That's why I've been uncomfortable, because I've been looking inward to me. But I've realized it's not about me. It's about your sheep. Then there's some of you that you're hearing this and you're saying, I know his voice. I've never even heard his voice. I want to know the shepherd. I want to have that experience of that overflowing water, that's living water that never runs dry, but I don't have it. I want you to know you can have it today. You do not have to leave here without the living presence of God abiding inside your spirit. And then there's some of you that might be like me a few years ago, where you're feeling that rod, staff of correction, looping you back in. It's time to come back in. You've been trying to do it your own way. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, Far from the Maddening Crowd, but I love this movie. It's another classic British movie. But the sheepdog is trying to do his own thing. He cannot be trained by the shepherd, and he leads like thousands of sheep over a cliff. And that's the first scene of the storyline. You have to watch it or read it to find out the rest of it. But the point is that the sheepdog was not following the voice of the shepherd, and the sheep were following the wrong sheepdog because they all went off the cliff. So sometimes we've been listening to the wrong voices and we're steered the wrong direction. It's time to come back into the flock. And then there are some of you that you're just like, man, this Psalms 23 has been exactly what I've needed, because I just need to be reminded that his goodness and his mercy are pursuing me all the days of my life, and I got to speak that truth over me.